Hello and welcome to this wonderful place that we call Grazing Brains. Please subscribe.
Stage 4. The Last of the Spirits. The phantom slowly, gravely, silently approached. When it came near him, Scrooge bent down upon his knees, for in the very air through which this spirit moved, it seemed to scatter gloom and mystery. It was shrouded in a deep black garment, which concealed its head, its face, its form, and left nothing of its visible save one outstretched hand. But for this it would have been difficult to detach its figure from the night, and separate it from the darkness by which it was surrounded. He felt that it was tall and stately when it came beside him, and that its mysterious presence filled him with a solemn dread. He knew no more, for the spirits neither spoke nor moved. "I am in the presence of the ghost of the Christmas yet to come," said Scrooge. The spirit answered not, but pointed downwards with its hand. "You are about to show me shadows of the things that have not happened, but will happen in the time before us," Scrooge pursued. "Is that so, spirit?" The upper portion of the garment was contracted for an instant in the folds, as if the spirit had inclined its head. That was the only answer he received. Although well used to ghostly company by this time, Scrooge feared the silent shape so much that his legs trembled beneath him, and he found that he could hardly stand when he prepared to follow it. The spirit paused a moment, as observing his condition, and gave him time to recover. But Scrooge was all the worse for this. It thrilled him with a vague and certain horror to know that behind the dusky shroud there were ghostly eyes instantly fixed upon him, while he, though stretched his own to the utmost, couldn't see nothing but a spectral hand and on a great heap of black. "Ghost of the future," he exclaimed, "I fear you more than any spectre have seen, but as I know your promise is to do me good, and as I hope to live to be another man from what I was, I am prepared to bear your company, and do it with a thankful heart. Will you not speak to me?" It gave him no reply. His hand was pointed straight before them. "Lead on," said Scrooge. "Lead on. The night is waning fast, and it is precious time to me, I know. Lead on, spirit." The phantom moved away as it had come toward him. Scrooge followed him in the shadow of its dress, which bore him up, he thought, carried him along. They scarcely seemed to enter the city, for the city rather seemed to spring up about them and encompass them for its own act. But there they were in the heart of it, on a change amongst the merchants, who hurried up and down, chinking the money in their pockets, and conversed in groups, and looked at their watches, and trifled thoughtfully with their great gold seals, and so forth, as Scrooge had seen them often. The spirit stopped beside one little knot of businessmen. Observing that the hand was pointing to them, Scrooge advanced to listen to their talk. "No," said a great fat man with a monstrous chin. "I don't know much about it. Either way, I only know he is dead." "When did he die?" inquired another. "Last night, I believe." "Why, what was the matter with him?" asked the third, taking a vast quantity of snuff out of a very large snuff box. "I thought he'd never die." "Gods, no," said the first man with a yawn. "What has he done with his money?" asked a red-faced gentleman with a pendulous excrescence on the end of his nose that shook like the gills of a turkey cock. "I haven't yet heard," said the man with the large chin, yawning again. "Left it to his company, perhaps?" "He hasn't left it to me, that's all I know." This pleasantry was received with a general laugh. "It's likely to be a very cheap funeral," said the same speaker, "for upon my life I don't know of anybody to go to it. Suppose we made a party and volunteer?" "I don't mind going if a lunch is provided," observed the gentleman with the excrescence on his nose. "But I must be fed if I make one." Another loud "Well, I'm the most disinterested among you, after all," said the first speaker, "for I never wear black gloves, I never eat lunch. But I will offer to go, if nobody else will. When I come to think of, I am not at all sure I wasn't his most particular friend, for we used to stop and speak whenever we met. Bye-bye." Speakers and listeners strolled away and mixed with another groups. Scrooge knew the man and looked towards the spirit for an explanation. The phantom glided on the street, its finger pointed to two persons meeting. Scrooge listened again, thinking that the explanation might lie here. He knew these men also, perfectly. They were men of business, very wealthy and of great importance. He had made a point always of standing well in their esteem in a business point of view. That is, strictly in a business point of view. "How are you?" said one. "How are you?" returned the other. "Well," said the first, "Old Scratch has got his own at last, hey?" "So I'm told," returned the second. "Cold, isn't it? Seasonable for Christmas time. You're not skater, I suppose?" "No, something else to think of. Good morning." Not another word. That was their meeting, their conversation, and they parted. Scrooge was at first inclined to be surprised that the spirit should attach importance to conversations apparently so trivial. But, feeling assured that they must have some hidden purpose, he set himself to consider what it was likely to be. They could scarcely be supposed to have any bearings of the death of Jacob, his old partner, for that was past, and this ghost province was the future. Nor could he think of any one immediately connected with himself, to whom he could apply them, but noting doubtably that to whomsoever they applied they had some latent moral for his own improvement. He resolved to treasure up every word he heard, and everything he saw, and especially to observe the shadows of himself when it appeared, for he had an expectation that the conduct of his future self would give him clue he missed, and would render the solution of this riddle easy. He looked about in that very place for his own image, but another man stood in his accustomed corner, and though the clock pointed to his usual time of the day for being there, he saw no likeness of himself among the multitude that poured in through the porch. It gave him little surprise, however, for he had been resolving in his mind a change of life, and thought and hoped he saw his newborn resolution carried out in this. Quiet and dark beside him stood the phantom. When he rose himself from his thoughtful quest, he fancied from the turn of the hand and its situation in reference to himself that the unseen eyes were looking at him keenly. It made him shudder and feel very cold. They left the busy scene and went into the obscure part of the town, where Scrooge had never penetrated before, although he recognized its situation and its bad repute. The ways were foul and narrow, the shops and houses wretched, the people half naked, drunken, slipshod, ugly. Alleys and archways, like so many cesspools, disgorged their offences of smell and dirt and life upon the struggling street, and the whole quarter reeked with crime, with filth and misery. Far in this then unfamous resort there was a low brewed victualling shop below a penthouse roof, where iron, old rack, bottles, bones, and greasy fowl bought. Upon the floor within were heaps of rusty keys, nails, chains, fingers, files, scales, weights, and refuse iron of all kinds. Secrets that few would like to scrutinize were bred and hidden in mountains of unseemly rags, masses of corrupted fat, and sculptures of bones. Sitting in among the wares he dealt in, by a charcoal stove made of old bricks, was a grey-haired rascal, nearly 70 years of age, who had screened himself from the cold air without by a fruzy curtaining of miscellaneous tatters hung upon a line, and smoked his pipe in all luxury of a calm retirement. Scrooge and the phantom came into the presence of this man, just as a woman with a heavy bundle slunk into the shop. But she had scarcely ended when another woman, similarly laden, came in too, and she was closely followed by a man in faded black, who was no less startled by the sight of them than they had been upon the recognition of each other. After a short period of blank astonishment, in which the old man with the pipe had joined them, they all three bursted into a laugh. "Let the charwoman alone to be the first," cried she who had entered first. "Let the laundress alone to be the second, and let the untaker's man alone to be the third. Look here, old Joe, here is a chance, if we haven't all three met here without meaning it." "You couldn't have met in a better place," said old Joe, removing his pipe from his mouth. "Come on, come into the parlour. You were made free of it long ago, you know, and the other two ain't strangers. Stop till I shut the door of the shop. Ah, how it streaks! There aren't such a rusty bit of metal in the place at its own hinge, I believe, and I'm sure there is no such old bones here as mine. We are all suitable of our calling. We are all well matched. Come on into the parlour." The parlour was the space behind the screen of rugs. The old man raked the fire together with an old steer rod, and having trimmed his smoke lamp, for it was night, with the stem of his pipe, put it in his mouth again. While he did this, the woman who had already spoken threw her bundle on the floor and sat down in a lounging manner on a stool, crossing her elbows on her knees, and looking with a bold defiance at the other two. "What the odds then? What odds, Mrs. Dilber?" said the woman. "Every person here a right to take care of themselves. He always did." "That is true, indeed," said the laundress. "No man more so." "Why then, don't stand staring as if you were afraid, woman. Who's the wiser? We are not going to pick holes in each other's coat, I suppose?" "No, indeed," said Mrs. Dilber and the man together. "We should hope not." "Very well then," cried the woman. "That's enough. Who is the worse for the loss of few things like this? No, not a dead man, I suppose?" No, indeed, said Mrs. Dilber, laughing. "If he wanted to keep him after he was dead, a wicked old screw," pursued the woman, "why wasn't he naturally in his life? If he had been, he'd have had somebody to look after him when he was struck with death, instead of lying gasping out his last there, alone by himself." "This is the truest word that ever was spoken," said Mrs. Dilber. "It is judgment on him." "I wish it was a little heavier one," replied the woman. "And it would have been, you may depend upon it, if I could lay my hands on anything else. Open that bundle, old Joe, and let me know the value of it. Speak out plainly. I'm not afraid to be the first, nor afraid for them to see it. We know pretty well that we were helping ourselves before we met here, I believe. It is no sin. Open the bundle, Joe." But the gallantry of her friends would not allow for this, and the man in faded black mounting the bridge of first produced his plunder. It was not extensive. A steel or two, a pencil, a pair of slip buttons, and a brooch of no great value were all. They were severely examined and appraised by old Joe, who chalked the sum he was disposed to give for each upon the wall, and added them up into the total when he found that there was nothing more to come. "That is your account," said John, "and I wouldn't give another sixpence if I was too boiled for not doing it. Who's next?" Mrs. Dilber was next. Sheets and towels, a little wearing apron, 2 old-fashioned silver teaspoons, a pair of sugar tongs, and a few boots. Her account was stated on the wall in the same manner. "I always give too much to ladies. It's a weakness of mine, and that is why I ruined myself," said old John. "That's your account. If you ask me for another penny, and made it an open question, I would repent of being so liberal, and knocking off half a crown." "And now undo my bundle, Joe," said the first woman. Joe went down on his knee for the great convenience of opening it, and having unfastened a great many knots, dragged out a large heavy roll of some dark stuff. "What do you call these?" said Joe. "Bed curtains?" "Ah," returned the woman, laughing and leaning forward on her crossed arm. "Bed curtains? You don't mean to say you took them down, rings and all, with him lying there?" said Joe. "Yes, I do," replied the woman. "Why not? You were born to make your fortune," said Joe, "and you will certainly do it." "I certainly shouldn't hold my hand when I can get anything it by reaching it out for the sake of such a man as he was. I promise you, Joe," returned the woman coolly. "Don't drop that oil upon the blankets now. His blankets? Asked Joe. Whose else, do you think? Replied the woman. He isn't likely to take cold without them, I dare say. I hope he didn't die of anything catching, eh? Said Joe, stopping his work and looking up. Don't you be afraid of that, returned the woman. I ain't so fond of his company that I'd lutter about him for such things, if he did. Ah, you may look through the shirts till your eyes age, but you won't find a hole in it. Not a threadbare place. It is the best he had, and a fine one too. They have washed it if it hadn't been for me. What do you call washing of it? Asked Joe. Putting it on him to be buried in, to be sure, replied the woman with a laugh. Somebody was a fool enough to do it, but I took it off again. If good enough for such a purpose, it is good enough for anything. It is quite as becoming to the body. He can't look uglier than he did in that one. Scrooge listened to this dialogue in horror, as they sat grouped about their spoils in the sandy light by the old man's lamp. He viewed them with a detestation and disgust which could hardly have been greater, though they had been obscene demons marking the corpse itself. Laughed the same woman when old Joe, producing a flannel bag with money in it, told out their several gains upon the ground. This is the end of it, you see. He frightened everyone away from him when he was alive. He profited when he was dead. Spirit, said Scrooge, shuddering from head to foot. I see. The case of this unhappy man might be my own. My life tends that way now. Mercifully heaven, what is this? He recoiled in terror, for the scene had changed, and now he almost touched the bed. A bare, uncurtained bed, on which, beneath ragged sheet, there lay a something covered up, which, though it was dumb, announced itself in awful language. The room was very dark, too dark to be observed with any accuracy, though Scrooge glanced around it in obedience to a secret impulse, anxious to know what kind of room it was. A pale light, rising in the outer air, fell straight upon the bed, and on it, plundered and bereft, unwashed, unwept, uncared for, was the body of this man. Scrooge glanced toward the phantom. Its steady head was pointed to the head. The cover was so carelessly adjusted that the slight raising of it, the motion of a finger upon Scrooge's part, would have disclosed the face. He thought of it, felt how easy it would be to do, and longed to do it, but had no power to withdraw the veil, than to dismiss the spectre at his head. O cold, rigid, dreadful death! Set up thine altar there, and dress it with such terrors as thou hast at thy command, for this is the thy dominion. But of the loved, revered, and honoured head, thou canst not turn on hair to thy dread purpose, or make one feature odious. It is not that the hand is very heavy, and will fall down when released. It is not that the heart and pulse are still, but the hand was opened genuinely and true, the heart brave, warm, and tender, and pulse immense. Strike, shadow, strike, and see his good deed springing from the wound to sow the world life immortal. No voice pronounced these words in Scrooge's ear, and yet he heard them. When he looked upon the bed, he thought, if this man could be raised up now, what would his foremost thoughts, avarice, hurt-dealing, gripping care, they would have brought him to a rich end truly. He lay in the dark empty house, with not a man, a woman, or a child, to say he was kind to me in this or that, and for the memory of one kind word I will be kind to him. A cat was stirring at the door, and there was a sound of gnawing rats beneath the hearthstone. What they wanted in the room of death, and why they were so restless and disturbed, Scrooge did not care to think. Spirit, said he, this is a fearful place. I shall not leave its lessons, trust me. Let us go. Still the ghost pointed with an unmoving finger to the head. I understand you, Scrooge returned, and I would do it if I could, but I have not the power, Spirit. I have not the power. Again it seemed to look upon him. If there is any person in the town who feels emotion caused by this man's death, said Scrooge, quite agonizing, show that person to me, Spirit, I beseech you. The phantom spread its dark robe before him for a moment, like a wig, and withdrew drawing revealed a room by daylight where a mother and her children were. She was expecting someone, and with anxious eagerness, for she walked up and down the room, started at every sound, looking out from the window, glanced at the clock, tried, but in vain, to work with her needle, and could hardly hear the voice of the children in their play. At length the long-expected knock was heard. She hurried to the door and met her husband, a man whose face was careworn and depressed, though he was young. There was a remarkable expression in it, a kind of serious delight for which he felt ashamed and which he struggled to repress. He sat down to the dinner that had been ordering for him by the fire, and when she asked him faintly, "What's news?" which was not until after long silence, he appeared embarrassed how to answer. "It is good," she said, "or bad," to help him. "Bad," he answered. "We are quite ruined?" "No, there is hope yet, Caroline. If he relents," she said amazed, "there is. Nothing is past hope if such miracle has happened." "He is past relenting," said her husband. "He is dead." She was mild and patient creature, if her face spoke truth, but she was thankful in her soul to hear it, and she said so with clasped hands. She prayed forgiveness for the next moment, and was sorry, but the first was the emotion of her heart. "When the half-drunk woman whom I told you of the last night said to me when I tried to see him and obtain a week's delay, and what I thought was a mere excuse to avoid me, turns out to have been quite true. He was not only very ill, but dying then. To whom will our debt be transferred? I don't know, but before that time we should be ready with the money, and even though we are not, it would be bad fortune indeed to find so merciless a creator in his succession. We may sleep tonight with light hearts, Caroline." Yes, softened as if their hearts were lighter. The children's face hushed and clustered around the ear what they so little understood were brighter, and it was a happier house for this man's death. The only emotion that the ghost could show him caused by the event was one of pleasure. "Let me see some tenderness connecting with the dead," said Scrooge, "or that dark chamber spirit which we left just now will be forever present to me." The ghost conducted him through several streets familiar to his feet. As they went along, Scrooge looked here and there to find himself, but nowhere was he to be seen. They entered poor Bob Cratchit's house, the dwelling he had visited before, and found the mother and the children seated around the fire. Quiet, very quiet. The noisy little Cratchits were as still as statues in one corner, and sat looking up at Peter, who had a book before him. The mother and the daughters were engaged in sewing, but surely they were very quiet. And he took a child and set him in the midst of them. Where he had heard these words, he had not dreamed them. The boy must have read them out as he had in the spirit crossed the threshold. Why did he not go on? The mother laid her work upon the table and put her hands up to her face. "The colors hurts my eyes," said she. "The color? Ah, poor tiny Tim. They are better now again," said Cratchit's wife. "It makes them weak by candlelight, and I wouldn't show weak eyes to your father when he comes home for the world. It must be near his time." "Past it, rather," Peter, shutting up his book. "But I think he walked a little slower than he used these few last evenings, mother." They were very quiet again. At last she said, in a steady, cheerful voice that only faltered once, "I have known him walk with tiny Tim upon his shoulder very fast indeed." "And so I have," cried Peter. "Often." "And so have I," exclaimed another. "So had all." "But he was very light to carry," she resumed, intent upon her work. "And his father loved him so that it was no trouble. And there is your father at the door." She hurried out to meet him, and little Bob, on his comfort, he had need of it, poor fellow, came in. His tea was ready for him on the hob, and they all tried who should help him it most. Then the two young Cratchits got upon his knees and laid each child two little cheek against his face, as if they said, "Don't mind, father, don't be grieved." Bob was very cheerful with them, and spoke pleasantly to all the family. He looked at the work upon the table, and praised the industry and speed of Mrs. Cratchit and the girls. They would be done long time before Sunday, he said. "Sunday? Sunday? You went today then, Robert?" "Yes, my dear," returned Bob. I wish you could have done. It would have done you good to see how green a place it is. But you will see it often. I promised him that I would walk there on Sunday. My little child, cried Bob. My little child. And he broke down all at once. He couldn't help it. If he could have helped it, he and his child have been farther apart perhaps than they were. He left the room and went upstairs into the room above, which was lighted and cheerfully and hung with Christmas. There was a chair set close beside the child, and there were signs of someone having been there lately. Poor Bob sat down in it, and when he had thought a little and composed himself, he kissed the little face. He was reconciled to what had happened and went down again, quite happy. They drew about the fire and talked, the girls and the mother working still. Bob told them of the extraordinary happiness of Mr. Scrooge's nephew, whom he had scarcely seen but once, and who, meeting him in the street that day, and seeing that he looked a little, just a little down, you know, said Bob, inquired what happened to distress him, on which, said Bob, for he is the pleasantest spoken gentleman you ever heard, I told him. I'm heartily sorry for it, Mr. Cratchit, he said, and heartily sorry for your good wife. By the by, how he ever knew that, I don't know. Knew what, my dear? Why, that you are a good wife, replied Bob. Everyone knows that, said Peter. Well, absurd, my boy, cried Bob. I hope they do. Heartily sorry, he said, for your good wife. If I can be of service to you in any way, he said, giving me his card, that where I live, pray come to me. No, it wasn't, cried Bob, for the sake of anything he might be able to do for us, so much as for his kind way, that was quite delightful. It really seems as if he had known Tiny Tim and felt with us. I'm sure he's a good soul, said Mrs. Cratchit. You would be sure of it, my dear, returned Bob. If you saw him and spoke to him, I shouldn't be at all surprised, mark what I say, if he got Peter a better situation. Only hear that, Peter, said Mrs. Cratchit. And then, cried one of the girls, Peter will be keeping company with someone and setting up for himself. Get along with it, retorted Peter, grinning. It is just as likely as not, said Bob. One of these days, though, there's plenty of time for that, my dear. But however, and whenever we part from one another, I'm sure we shall none of us forget poor Tiny Timmy, shall we, or this first parting that was among us? Never, father, cried they all. And I know, said Bob, I know, my dears, that when we recollect how patient and how mild he was, although he was a little child, we shall not quarrel easily among ourselves and forget poor Tiny Tim in doing it. No, never, father, they all cried again. I'm very happy, said little Bob. I'm very happy. Mrs. Cratchit kissed him, his daughters kissed him, the two young Cratchits kissed him, and Peter and himself shook hands. The spirit of Tiny Tim, thy child's essence, was from God. Spectre, said Scrooge, something informs me that our parting moment is at hand. I know it, but I know not how. Tell me, what meant that was whom we saw lying dead? The ghost of Christmas yet to come conveyed him, as before, though at a different time, he thought. Indeed, there seemed no order of this latter vision, save that they were in the future, into the resorts of businessmen, but showed him not himself. Indeed, the spirit did not stay for anything, but went straight on, as to the end just now desired, until bestowed by Scrooge tarry for a moment. This court, said Scrooge, through which we hurried now, is where my place of occupation is, and has been for length of time. I see the house, let me behold what I shall be in the days to come. The spirit stopped, and hand was pointed elsewhere. The house is yonder, Scrooge exclaimed. Why do you point away? The inexorable finger underwent no changes. Scrooge hastened to the window of his office and looked in it. It was an office still, but not his. The furniture was not the same, and the figure in the chair was not himself. The phantom pointed as before. He joined it once again, and wondering why and whither he had gone, accompanied it until they reached an iron gate. He paused to look around before entering. A churchyard. Here, then, wretched man whose name he had now to learn lay underneath the ground. It was a worthy place, low in by house, overrun by grass and grown of vegetations that not life, chopped up with too much burring, fat with repellent appetite. A worthy place. The spirit stood among the graves and pointed down to one. He advanced towards in trembling. Phantom was exactly as it had been, but he dreaded that he saw new meaning in its solemn shape. "Before I drew near to that stone to which you point," said Scrooge, "answer me one question. Are these the shadows of things that will be, or the shadows of the things that may be only?" Still the ghost pointed downward to the grave by which it stood. "Men's courses will foreshadow certain ends, to which, if preserved, they must lead," said Scrooge. "But if the courses be departed from, the end will change. Say this, thus with what you show me." The spirit was immovable as ever. Scrooge crept towards it, trembling as he went, and followed the finger, and read upon the stone of the neglected grave his own name, Ebenezer Scrooge. "I am the man who laid upon the bed," he cried upon his knees. The finger pointed from the grave to him and back. "No, spirit, oh no, no!" The finger was still there. "Spirit," he cried, tight clutching at its robe, "hear me! I am not the man I was. I will not be the man I must have been for this intercourse. Why show me this, if I am past all hopes?" For the first time the hand appeared to shake. "Good spirit," he pursued, as down upon the ground he fell before it, "your nature intercedes for me and pity me. Assure me that I yet may change these shadows you have shown me by an altered life." The kind hand trembled. "I will honor Christmas in my heart and try to keep it all the year. I will live in the past, the present, and the future. The spirits of all three shall strive within me. I will not shut out the lessons they teach. Oh, tell me, I may sponge away the writing on this stone." In his agony he caught the spectral hand. It sought to free itself, but he was strong in his entreaty and denied. The spirit, stronger yet, repulsed him. Holding up his hands in one last prayer to have his face reversed, he saw an alteration in the phantom's foot and dress. It shrunk, it collapsed, and dwindled down into a bed. This is the end of today's story. I hope that these past minutes helped you relax and ease you into falling asleep. If you are not 100% there yet, let us just do a breathing exercise. Count mentally with me your breath intakes and exhales. Concentrate on the count, nothing more. Intake 4. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and release 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. In 4. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Out 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Intake 4. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and release 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. In 4. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Out 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Intake 4. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and release 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. In 4. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Out 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Intake 4. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and release 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. In 4. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. out 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, in 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, out 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5,